Hi, welcome back. In this video, we'll look at JavaScript syntax, variables, and data types. Before we jump in and start coding, I want to mention the useStrict directive. This directive is used to tell the browser that all JavaScript should be executed in strict mode. And we want to use strict mode because it helps us write better, more secure JavaScript. When executing JavaScript in modern browsers, using strict mode will change any syntactically incorrect JavaScript code into errors. And we can see these errors in the JavaScript console in the developer tools, which we should always have open when we're writing and testing JavaScript. We declare strict mode by placing the directive in quotes at the beginning of our scripts or before functions. For example, in this code, I have our script block, and to force the browser to execute JavaScript in strict mode, we'll just add the useStrict directive. Now we can start coding. And we'll start with comments in JavaScript. And comments in JavaScript take two forms. For a single line comment, we use 2 forward slashes. And for multi-line comments, we use this syntax. And if I save this page, refresh the browser, and view the page source, we actually see the comments in the HTML. Now, the browser ignores these comments, just like it does for HTML and CSS, so the comments are really here for the developer. And of course, we'll use plenty of comments as we go through the examples. Moving on, let's discuss JavaScript variables. And variables aren't unique to JavaScript. They exist in all programming languages. And what variables are is containers for storing data or data values. For instance, in this example here, they've declared 3 variables. The first one has a variable name of x, and they've set its value equal to the number 5. The second one obviously has a name of y, and its value is the number 6. The third one has a name of z, and its value is equal to the value of x plus the value of y. So in this case, we look for the variable x, which is declared here. We get its value, which is 5, and then we substitute the 5 for the variable. Then we do the same. We find the variable y, we get its value, and we substitute the 6 here. So when this code executes, z is equal to 11. And in JavaScript, there are 4 ways of declaring variables. We can use the keyword var, the keyword let, the keyword const, or no keyword at all. And we're going to skip this last way of declaring variables because it's really not best practice. We will, however, look at these 3. So if there are 3 keywords that we can use to declare variables, how do we know which one to use in which situation? Well, the var keyword is used for older browsers. So if you want your code to run in an older browser, you must use the var keyword. Now, the let and const keywords were added in 2015, so it's probably safe to assume, famous last words, that most people are using a modern browser, in which case we should use the let and const keywords. And as they note here, if you want a general rule to follow, always declare your variables with the const keyword. And const stands for constant, which means, obviously, the value won't change. It's constant. If you think the value of a variable can change, then use let. So, for example, here they've declared a variable named price1, and they've set its value to the number 5. They have a variable price2, and its value is set to the number 6. Then they're declaring a total variable set to the sum of the variables price1 and price2's values. Now, they used the const keyword for the prices because when this code executes, the prices aren't going to change. They're constant. But they used let because total is calculated based on the values of the constants. So here's an example, I hope, that helps you understand the difference between using const and let. Now, let's jump over to VS Code and create some of our own variables. Now, one thing I want to mention, when declaring your variables, you should use descriptive names. So let's scroll up to this example again. Here they declared a variable named X, and a variable named Y, and a variable named Z. Now, just looking at those variables, we have no idea what they represent. I mean, X has a value of 5, but 5 what? X isn't very descriptive of its value, nor is Y, and Z, just being the sum of X and Y, doesn't tell me what that sum represents. Now, down here in this example, price 1, price 2 are more descriptive, and total is a very descriptive variable name, indicating that total will be the sum of some other variable's values. So in our code, let's create some variables. We'll start out with a const, and we'll give this a name of first name, and we'll set it equal to the string foo, and then we'll end our statement with a semicolon. Notice the syntax that I'm using for this variable. It starts with a lowercase letter, and then when there's another word in the variable name, I capitalize the first letter. So this is called camel casing, and it's a very common way of writing your variable names. And let's declare another const, and we'll give this a name of last name. Now, let's write these values out to the JavaScript console so we can see them. And we can use that using a utility called console.log, and where we pass a string to the log. So let's just start out by writing the string test. So if I go back to the browser and I refresh the page, in the JavaScript console tab of developer tools, we see the word test. Now let's jump back into our code and display the first and last name. So I can do that by referencing the first name variable, and then I want to add to that, I want to concatenate to the first name, the last name variable, or the values of the variables. Now if I save and refresh the page, I see first and last name, but I need a space in there. So let's go back to our code and we'll add a space. So when we console.log, we'll go find the first name variable, get its value, and substitute that in this string concatenation. Then we'll add a space after the first name, and then we'll go find the last name variable and substitute its value. So when we run it this time, now we have foo space bar. So let's add a few more variables. And let's add another console.log statement for the address. Now, we could concatenate the variable values using the plus sign, like we just did for first name and last name. But if we did that with the address, it would take a lot of pluses and a lot of spaces. So there's another way that we can concatenate this string and print it out to the console. And that's by using a template literal. Now, when we build our strings using template literals, we use the backticks instead of using the quotation marks. So back in our code, in the example where we concatenated the first name and the last name, if this were a template literal, we'd wrap everything in backticks. But the beauty of a template literal is that we don't need to do the string concatenation in here. And that's due to string interpolation, which provides an easy way to interpolate the variable values into expressions in the string. And the syntax for string interpolation is to start with a $sign and then enclose the variable you want to display inside open and close curly braces. So back in our code, I'll add a $sign before first name, then I'll wrap it in the curly braces, I'll leave a space, and then do the same for the last name. And if I save this and go back to the browser and refresh, we still see foobar, but I didn't need the plus and space for the string concatenation. And we can now easily display the address, and that's what I've done here. And then when we look in the console in the browser, we see we have our address. Now, we've declared these variables using the const keyword, so we expect their values to be constant. What do you think will happen if we try and change the value of one of the variables? Well, let's try it out and see. Here, I'll reference the existing street address variable, and note that I don't need the keyword to declare the variable because it's already been defined. I just need to reference it by name. and I'll set its value to 100 Main Street. I'll save the page and reload the browser, and we see we have an error in the JavaScript console. Assignment to constant variable. Because I declared the variable as a constant, I told the browser that this variable's value will always be the same. It can't be changed. It's constant. If I had used the let keyword to define the variable, now it's no longer constant and it can be changed. So if I reload the page now, we see that the value of the variable has been changed. That's the difference between using let and const. The last topic I'd like to cover in this video is JavaScript data types. Data types are used to define the type of data being stored in a variable's value. Let's take a look at some examples in our code. So here, I've declared a constant variable named street address, and its data type is a string. Now, we can encapsulate the string's text in either double quotes or single quotes. Just be consistent. If you start with a double quote, end with a double quote, and the same with a single quote. And note that these are single quotes, not the tick marks that we were using for string literals. If you have a string that has quotation marks in it, for instance, here I have a string, my preferred name is Rob, and Rob is in double quotes. If my string is wrapped in double quotes, I need to use an escape character, which is the backslash, to tell the browser that I want this double quote to be included within the string's text, not to end the string. Now, this is an example of when you may want to use single quotes, because if you wrap the string in single quotes, you don't have to escape the double quotes inside of the string text. So if I console.log both of these, we see the same result. The first one was done by wrapping the entire string in double quotes and then using the escape character, whereas the second one was wrapped in single quotes, so we didn't have to escape the double quotation marks inside of the text. Another data type is the number, so it could be a whole number or a decimal, and of course we can perform mathematical operations on those numbers. There's another data type called the Boolean, and the Boolean is true or false. So in this case, we have a constant, store is open, its value is set to true, store is closed, it's set to false. And these are often used in conditional statements, which we will see in another video. A more advanced data type is an array, and an array is declared using the open and closed square brackets. So let's create a new array. So I'll create a variable called empty array, and I'll set it equal to the empty quotes. And if I console.log empty array, now we see we have an array, the open and closed square brackets, but no values inside. Here I've declared another variable called front-end web development languages. It's set to an array of multiple string values. The first string, obviously HTML, then CSS, then JavaScript, separated or delimited by a comma. And if I wanted to get one of the values out of this array, I'd have to access it using an index. And in JavaScript, arrays start with index 0. So there are 3 elements in this array. The first one is the string HTML, the second CSS, and obviously the third is the string JavaScript. But if I want to get the value HTML out of this array and put it in a variable, like I've done here, I've declared a constant named HTML, and I want to set it equal to this value HTML in the front-end web development array, I reference the variable name for the array, front-end web development languages, and then in square brackets I put the position of the index. So again, arrays in JavaScript are 0 indexed. So this says go to the variable front-end web development languages and give me the value in the 0th index. So if I console.log first front-end web development languages, here we see we have an array with 3 elements in it, and you can see the position 0, so the 0th index is HTML, 1 is CSS, 2 is JavaScript. So if I uncomment out this console.log statement of the HTML constant that I declared and run this, we'll see that we have the value HTML because it's in the 0th index. Another more advanced data type in JavaScript are object literals. And objects are data types that are wrapped within open and closed curly braces, and they have key value pairs. So here I've defined a variable, it's a constant named customer data. Its data type is an object or an object literal. Its values are the key value pairs inside of the curly braces. So customer data has a first name with a value of foo, a last name with a value of bar. Now, the key value pairs are separated by the colon, and the entire key value pairs are separated by a comma. So here, this customer data object has a first and last name, which are strings, has an email, which is a string, an age, which is a number, and an is active user, which is a Boolean. So if I console.log customer data, we see we have the open and closed curly braces, and if we expand this, we see our key value pairs inside of the object. So moving down, we see that we can use the type of operator to determine a variable's data type. So in this case, if I want to write out the data type of the street address variable, I use the type of operator, and then I reference the variable that I want to get the type from. So if I run this, I would expect that street address is a string, right? Because we declared the constant street address, we set it equal to the string 100 Main Street. So the type of operator referencing the variable street address should tell us that this is a string. Now, if I pass customer data to the type of operator, it should tell me that customer data is an object. We declared it here, and its value is an open closed curly brace with key value pairs. So if we go ahead and run this now, we do see street address is a string data type and customer data is an object data type. Now, if we declare a variable but don't assign it a value, then its data type will be undefined. So up above all these variables, when we declared them, we gave them a name, and then we set them equal to some value. Here I've declared a variable, but I haven't set it equal to a value. So if I console.log my variable, we'll see that its value is undefined. Now, one thing to note is that JavaScript data types are dynamic. So just because I declare a variable visitor counter and I set it equal to the number 10, and if we run this using the type of operator, we'll see that 10 is a number. I could then reference the same variable name and set it equal to the string ten. And if I run this, we'll see that the variable data type went from a number to a string. So you just really have to be careful when you're declaring your variables that they're the proper data type that you want to use, and then just make sure that you put that data type into the proper variable. Finally, I want to look at one more example. And in this case, I've declared a variable customer name, and I set it equal to the string foobar. And then I declared another variable order total and set it equal to 125. Now I want a variable named order message, and I want to set it equal to the customer name and the order total, so that I can maybe print this line out as a line in an invoice. So if I save this now and reload the page, I see that I get foo space bar, which was the first name, and then 125. Now it has concatenated these two because JavaScript is smart enough to know I can't add a number to a string. So what it does is it converts the number to a string and then does concatenation. If I were to use the type of operator and run this, we'll see that foobar 125, the value of the order message, is in fact a string. We'll get plenty of practice working with variables and data types as we progress through this tutorial series, so don't worry if you don't feel too comfortable with them yet. In fact, in the next video, when we look at conditional operators and loops, we'll get a chance to use plenty more variables of different data types. I hope to see you there.